Good afternoon, everyone. Warm welcome. My name is Maggie Allen. I'm Special Projects Lead at Autistica. Delighted to be with you today in today's panel session on social care. So we have 4 fantastic presentations today on a range of important social care related topics. And there's a real pressing need to ensure that autistic adults have access to social care that is effective and supportive. Social care must be designed, developed and adapted to meet the needs of autistic adults, though this requires an increase in the amount and the quality of research into autism and social care. So this stream will explore key issues affecting autistic people within social care, including the adaptation of support provision for the homeless population, as well as people with addiction issues. So Barry, Jade, Caitlin, Rachel and Sarah will be joining us for the live Q&A at the end of the session once their presentations are finished. We really welcome our audience to participate by submitting questions via the Q&A system just below this video. These will be collated by my Autistica colleagues and we'll try and get to as many of those questions as we can. Some of our presenters have agreed to let us share their email addresses. And so if you have any further questions, please feel very free to put those in the Q&A system after the whole panel session has finished. So without further ado, I would like to say that we've got 3 presenters joining us for the Q&A session. They are Mary, Georgia and Shantelle. Warm welcome to you 3. So let's get started. That's over to Mary.
Hello, so I'm Mary Stewart and I'd like to tell you about one of our projects which was funded by an Autistica Social Care Development Award, and we focused on autism, ageing and social care. I'd like to note that we had a lot of help from a lot of people, in particular autistic people and social care staff who consulted with us, Craig Wolfe, who carried out the project, and Louise Kirby from the Autism Champion Network, as well as members of the grant who are listed here. So older autistic people report that they are not receiving the support that they require to thrive into older age. And this is something that is also reported by support staff. Health and cognitive changes related to aging may well intersect with autism-related support needs. And the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Autism report that there's poor autism understanding by professionals and that there's low awareness of duties that are included in the Autism Act, which results in a 71%, really high percentage of autistic adults that were living without the support that they needed. Now, it's important to note that the majority of research in autism is with children, and there's far less on adults and almost none on older adults. So when I'm talking about previous studies here, there are very limited previous studies done in this group, and particularly within social care. So we've suggested that there can be a higher need to be able to access social care, and that some previously identified priorities, now these were from some studies that were done, and also from some scoping work that we conducted ourselves. So these other priorities were the health and well-being and aging, people's understanding of the aging process and service planning, relationships and social inclusion, and legal and financial advocacy. So given that and saying that, there's clearly very little work done within social care, so it's really important in this project to identify the areas of priority and gaps in social care for older autistic people, and identify those from autistic people and from social care workers. So we had 3 rounds of interviews, with autistic people and social care providers, and to know each round fed into the next. So we identified some themes in the first round which fed into the second and third rounds. We also gave out a wellbeing plan to make sure that we would be able to support the people who spoke to us, and we asked everyone whether they had a preference for single interviews or for focus groups. Now, everybody we spoke to had a preference to do a single interview, and Autistica were very flexible with this. So we'd originally planned to do some focus groups and some single interviews, but we ended up doing 34 single interviews, which obviously is a little bit more time consuming than within just doing focus groups. So Autistica were flexible with the funding for that, which was absolutely superb. We also asked everyone what was their preference for communication, whether it be text, phone, email, Zoom or Teams, and we were able to accommodate that going forward. So we had 3 interview rounds. The first identified priorities, gaps, and good practice in social care support for autistic people as they age, and we consulted with 16 older autistic people. When I say older, not so super old, age 50 plus, so really quite young, and with a couple of social care workers. We identified themes within that first round of interviews, and one of those major themes was healthy aging within the home. So we looked into that in more depth with 10 autistic people, again, aged 50 plus. And we also looked at provision of care with 8 social care providers, again, looking at people who provided care within the home and went from home to home. So recruitment, well, all our recruitment did, of course, take place during COVID. And we recruited between November 2021 and March 2022. So in between the Delta and Omicron variants. So recruitment was challenging, but we had lots of support for this. So as I mentioned, Louise Kirby really helped us with linking us up with the Autism Champions Network. Autistica, of course, supported us. We recruited through Twitter, through Men's Sheds, through word of mouth, and also through direct contact with social care organisations who've been absolutely superb. We did get, that was quite challenging to recruit between December and January from the social care organisations due to the restrictions in place at the time, but we did get a number of folk to participate after that. So the interviews were audio recorded and transcribed. The written responses were saved from text chat, and the data were analysed using thematic analysis, which involves the identification and analysis of patterns within a data set. And what I'm going to report today is just that first look of the analysis. We will be conducting the analysis in more depth, but this is just the first look. So I identified a number of themes from within the data from that first study that we did. We'll talk about the other studies in other settings, but today we're just going to talk about that first round of interviews. One of the themes that came up was institution isolation, where people reported that they felt really isolated from services and there just wasn't the provision specific for older autistic people. So there might be provision specifically for older people, there might be provision specifically for autistic people, but not autistic people as they age, or not for older people that also are autistic. And so one thing that came from that was that there really needs to be understanding and training within service staff. Now that's not just knowing that there is something called autism and that autistic people age, it's actually understanding how to work with autistic people is really important. And that came through really strongly, and that's something that we've applied for additional funding for with the NIHR, which is one of the outcomes of this grant. One other theme that came through very strongly that was out with the remit of our project was interaction with the NHS and healthcare services. So interacting with receptionists, with GPs, with secondary and tertiary services. All of that was challenging. And there were a number of amazing suggestions from our participants, and we hope to be able to take those forward and look into those themes in a bit more depth. One additional theme that came through was being able to determine own outcomes and having that independence to do that. So feeling that having that control over one's own outcomes and direction in life. And that really feeds into this theme of healthy, independent aging. So being able to age at home, healthily, or within an environment of one's own choosing. And that is something that we'll be looking at within the second round of interviews that we did. So it will take us a few months to be able to work through all that data. One other theme that came through was being othered and feeling burdened. So being made to feel that you're different and that you constantly had to explain and train people how to work with you. And that can be very challenging, and particularly challenging if there's a high turnover of staff that are working with you, and challenging if you are having multiple needs, for instance, interaction with the NHS, that you're constantly having to train different people to be able to work with you. And you can imagine that can become more burdensome as you age, or more burdensome if you've got an additional level of vulnerability. And many of our people who consulted with us suggested that there should be a lifelong plan, and people were hoping that for the younger generation that is something that would happen, so that when you get to old age there would already be a plan in place, so that people don't have to move or undergo difficult transitions when they're particularly vulnerable. And that's something that was a really key theme that came from the data. So we're going to be busy. We have quite a lot of further work to do. We want to go through the data and really analyse that in depth. We want to sense check it with the people who consulted with us, and then we want to write that up for publication, both in academic journals, but also to be able to disseminate to, for instance, social care organisations and to autistic people themselves, and further stakeholders as well. We have an application currently with NIHR, so fingers crossed for that. I've been asked to be a reviewer for the British Association of Social Work guidelines, and that's as a direct result of working on this project and the information that we've gained from this project so far. And we have plans to develop further applications to work on issues such as healthy aging. So we're going to be very busy, but it's a really and it's an area where there's great need and very little work so far. So there's a lot to be done. So thanks very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much to Mary Stewart for that fascinating presentation. Just so important to make sure that all age groups are represented, particularly ones that are underrepresented, such as older people. An amendment from me. We are also being joined in our Q&A session by Sally Adams. So Sally, welcome. We look forward to you joining us later. So our next speaker is Georgia Lockwood Estrin. And over to you, Georgia, on homelessness and autism in women.
Hi everyone, my name is Georgia Lockwood Estrin, and I currently work at the University of East London. But prior to that, I was a research fellow at Birkbeck, part of the University of London, which is actually where this work was conducted. And today I'm presenting on a project on homelessness and autism in women. And this, just to highlight that this research has been a huge collaborative effort, and so I'm really just presenting today on behalf of the whole team. Before starting, I'd also really like to thank Autistica for inviting me to present this work today, and for organising such an exciting research festival. So before I begin, I wanted to give a brief overview of what I'm going to be presenting on today. First, I'll start with an introduction and a context of sort of why are we doing this research and what's the importance of it, looking at why are we focusing on autism and homelessness, and what do we actually mean when we talk about homelessness, as well as then looking at why do we want to focus on women in this work. I'll then go over what our aims and our methodological approach was, before then detailing the results that we found, which specifically included recommendations for research and research priorities, as well as recommendations to service provision. I'll then finish by summarising what we found and talking about our next steps. So firstly, why are we interested in focusing on autism and homelessness? Well, there's a really limited amount of evidence in this area. However, of the limited evidence, studies have demonstrated that autistic individuals are at a much higher risk of experiencing homelessness. For example, a large study conducted in Wales a few years ago now found that about 12% of autistic adults had spent some time homeless. Similar results have been found in other research studies that have focused on homeless populations, where over 12% were found to meet the diagnostic criteria of autism. And this is approximately 12 times higher than in the general population. So there's a clear need here to better understand the links between autism and high risk of homelessness. So what is it, homelessness? What do we mean when we talk about homelessness? Well, it's really an umbrella term that includes a range of different definitions, including people who are sleeping rough on the streets. And this is a group of homeless people that we actually know most about. Most research is conducted on this group of individuals, and most services aim to meet the needs of these individuals. However, there's another much larger and hidden population of homelessness, and has been termed the hidden homeless population, which includes individuals living in either temporary or insecure accommodation, for example at hostels or staying with families or friends, as well as living in accommodation that may not be fit for purpose or squatting. And women actually represent a large proportion of this hidden homeless population. So we know that homelessness can result from a multitude of factors and is often down to an interaction between both individual as well as structural factors. And this can include a loss of employment, relationship breakdown, lack of social support, and mental ill health. Unfortunately, these circumstances disproportionately impact autistic individuals. So research conducted by the National Autistic Society a few years ago now showed that only 16% of autistic adults were in full-time paid work, meaning that unemployment is high, which is a key risk factor for homelessness. Moreover, autistic individuals may be more likely to have reduced levels of social support. Again, the same National Autistic Society report showed that almost 80% of autistic adults reported feeling socially isolated, which is again another risk factor for homelessness. Finally, mental ill health is also a key risk factor that can increase an individual's risk of becoming homeless. And evidence has shown that almost 80% of autistic adults have experienced some sort of mental health problem during their lifetime. So we've seen why it's important to focus on autism and homelessness, but why is it important to specifically focus on women in this research? Well, to date, we know that there's very little limited research in this area, full stop, but most of this research has focused almost exclusively on men. However, it's really important that we bring in representation from women, as women's experience of homelessness can be really distinct from men's. For example, it's often shaped by gender-based violence. Whilst estimates do vary in different studies, a recent study published last year showed that 1 in 5 women who experience violence become homeless. Then once homeless, women's experiences of sleeping rough can also include violence and abuse. Women are also often left out of research and homelessness figures, as they're more likely to avoid homelessness services due to a lack of appropriate and physically safe facilities. Therefore, women tend to take different trajectories through homelessness, often preferring to remain invisible or to hide as you can see illustrated in the quote on the right from a St Mungo's report. Therefore, due to this real limited research in this area, there's a need to improve our understandings of specific risk factors and needs of autistic individuals, particularly women, experiencing homelessness. This increased understanding can ultimately enable support services to provide targeted, effective and lasting support that can hopefully, in the long term, help prevent homelessness or reduce periods of homelessness. Therefore, as a first step in this research and longer-term objectives, we conducted a collaborative workshop that aimed to first map gaps in our knowledge and practice. Second, we aimed to identify priority areas for research. And third, we aimed to develop recommendations for how to implement novel research and practice in this area. To do this, we invited 26 stakeholders to partake in this collaborative workshop. The group of stakeholders that were invited and attended were diverse and multidisciplinary. Attendees included autistic women, individuals with experience of homelessness, researchers, both quantitative and qualitative researchers, homelessness charity representatives, domestic violence charity representatives, service providers, including from councils as well as from charities, psychologists and health professionals, as well as finally policymakers and commissioners. In this workshop, we identified two key areas of research priority. First, to establish the prevalence and demographics of autistic women experiencing homelessness. It was highlighted that there is a real need to have these accurate estimates in order to evidence the needs of this group for clinical and homelessness services. These estimates are also really important to place autism at the top of priorities for appropriate changes to be made within policy and practice. Our second priority area that we identified is to understand the risks and protective factors for homelessness of autistic individuals. And this research is really important to then go on to be used to help tailor services to meet individual needs. The workshop also provided recommendations for research and research methodology to enable research to be more accessible and to have high impact. And you can see the details of that in this fairly detailed table. But I'll just highlight three aspects here that you can see in orange on the table on this slide. The first is the importance of research to be co-produced with autistic women and with individuals who had experience of homelessness. The second was the importance of using mixed methodology, both quantitative and qualitative research methods, to look at the how and the why. Finally, in order to overcome some of the multiple barriers in accessing this population for research, it was recommended to recruit or try to recruit participants from multiple services, including homelessness, clinical and charity services. Our workshop also provided recommendations for service provision. The two most important factors highlighted were the need to improve communication and awareness of autism, as well as building trust with service providers. This included the importance of improving the culture and attitude within organisations as a whole around autism. It was particularly recommended to provide autism training for service providers. Our workshop also came up with a number of recommendations for the practical provision of support, which I won't go into detail here, but which we detail in our upcoming short report of our findings, which you should be able to find soon. However, a few small details that we found was that, for example, the importance of offering flexibility of support, for example, in accommodation needs, food preferences, or offering an individual the ability to have greater control over their environment, for example, to minimise any potential sensory overload. Therefore, in summary, we found that further research is really critical to understand pathways that lead to homelessness for autistic individuals, and particularly women, who are often underrepresented in research and practice. The barrier, as well as looking at the barriers to engaging with homelessness and social services. We need to then use the knowledge that we gain to develop new ways of delivering targeted and inclusive support, which could ultimately help prevent or shorten periods of homelessness. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time and your interest in this research. And particular thanks to all of our collaborators and attendees at the workshop, without whom we would not have been able to conduct this work. So I'll now hand over to the chair of the session, who will introduce you to the next presentation. Please can you save any questions you might have until the end of the session, where I'll happily answer them in the live question and answer session. Thank you very much.
So huge thank you to Georgia Lockwood Estrin. Some staggeringly stark figures there around the autistic homeless population, and particularly autistic women, showing the timely need for this research and its recommendations. So next up is Shantelle Svarc, who is the founding director of Dark Side Rising, community interest company. Over to you, Shantelle.
Hi, it's an honour to be here, and I can't wait to tell you more about our work developing autistic lived experience leadership in the sports and physical activity sector. My name is Shantelle Svarc, and I am a director of Dark Side Rising CIC, a women's health non-profit based in Lincoln. After receiving my own autism diagnosis in 2019 at the age of 31, I felt compelled to develop my own lived experience into something that could be of benefit to others in the autistic community. And so Dark Side Rising was born. As we go through this presentation today, you will gain a broad understanding of who we are at Dark Side Rising, of the autism-specific projects that we run, and our vision for the future. We have 3 directors at Dark Side Rising. I focus mainly on bid writing, project management, and mentoring. Annabelle Hunt leads our mindful art provision and coach strength training on our projects for autistic women. And Robert Wilmington leads our mindfulness provision, facilitating the peer support and meditation groups. And of course, we are a gym. Shortly after incorporating in January 2020, we were awarded £15,000 from the Lincolnshire Autism Support Network, offering 6 months of physical activity sessions and mentoring in order to improve the mental health and well-being of autistic women in our community. This was just a one-off pot of funding, and so when we saw the National Lottery Leaders with Lived Experience Fund, we knew that this would be perfect to continue our work. We were successful in our bid and managed to secure £30,000 for Real Autistic Women, a 1-year project mentoring lived experience leadership in sports and physical activity. Now, of course, it wasn't quite as simple as that. The day after signing our contract for the Spectrum project, gyms were advised to close due to the coronavirus pandemic. 3 days later, the UK entered lockdown. It wasn't until July 2020, as the first lockdown was easing, that we were able to start the Spectrum project. A few months later, in November, the second lockdown started. This time, as we had an established project, we decided to move our whole provision onto Zoom to ensure continuity of support for our participants over the long and difficult winter. In January 2021, still in lockdown, we were able to secure an additional small pot of funding from the Lincolnshire Autism Support Network to continue sessions until March. And in February 2021, we could finally announce that we had been successful with the National Lottery Leaders with Lived Experience Fund. The Real Autistic Women project started in April 2021 and ran through until the beginning of June 2022. We are now searching for further funding to continue our work. For both of these projects, we accepted women without a formal diagnosis of autism. A formal diagnosis can be really difficult to obtain, particularly for an adult woman. And there were also many reasons why an autistic person may not want to pursue a diagnosis, but they should still be able to access safe and empowering spaces. As my background lies in powerlifting and strength training, our projects for autistic women have also focused on this form of physical activity. Strength training teaches us that in the midst of hardship we stand, that perseverance creates success, and that there will always be the dark side community cheering us on.
This project has given me a sense of purpose, direction, a feeling of belonging and a safe space for me. Building my strength and fitness levels and being able to recognise my own limits and capabilities physically and mentally, and it's allowed me to push my anxieties for a better quality of life.
My name's Belle. I'm one of the coaches on the RAW project. I have coached a lot of the women from the moment they came through the door until the very end of the project.
I feel more confident. I think I've made some really good friends. Everyone who I've come across at the gym has been nothing but supportive. Yeah, I just think I'm part of a good little community where everybody cares about each other.
I'm Emily. I'm one of the coaches involved in the RAW project, and I've been coaching Lizzie for about a year, and it's been an absolute delight and a privilege to watch Lizzie grow, not only in strength but also in confidence.
I can't really ever think of anything that was physical that I had enjoyed. I kind of made the decision for myself as well. I was just going to go and try it and see what happened. If I didn't think it was right for me, then that's okay. But again, walking into the gym, everybody was so friendly and welcoming. I felt really included. I really enjoyed the lifting. It's been really nice for me to be included in a space that I've never felt included in before.
We asked participants to describe the impact of the project on their lives. They felt a sense of belonging, that they were more involved in social activities and had improved their mental and physical health. They felt empowered, understood, supported, and accepted. We developed 2 case studies for the RAW project as part of our evaluation. Taking part in the RAW project was a big step for Helen, as she has always struggled with social anxiety. She doesn't have a formal diagnosis of autism and felt that the project helped her to accept and normalise her own autistic expression. Helen felt that the project had a huge impact on her. It helped to increase her friend circle, improve her confidence socially, and she has been able to reduce medications that she takes for her mental health. And she has improved her physical health and strength. Now, in Helen's own words, the idea of developing into a lived experience leader strikes tremendous fear. But then in a second breath, maybe. In her case study interview, we asked Helen to identify any ways in which we as an organisation could support her leadership development. She said, "Knowing that you have my back, and I already know that." Although the RAW project is now finished, we are continuing to work with Helen to support her development as a lived experience leader. Lizzie found out about the RAW project through her work, but joining us was a big decision as she had never felt safe in health and fitness spaces. With a history of panic attacks, it was also difficult for her if she became out of breath whilst exercising. Lizzie doesn't have a formal diagnosis of autism, and so she sometimes struggles to feel as though her lived experience is equal to someone who has been diagnosed. Through this project, Lizzie has learnt to trust her experience and now understands how it may help others. She is interning at the gym and working towards her level 3 personal trainer qualification. to the future. As Darkside Rising continues to grow and develop, we are dedicated to exploring autistic lived experience leadership and developing spaces that are safe for autistic and neurodivergent people. To this end, we have 3 autistic women from the RAW project interning at the gym, and we welcome partnership conversations from other organisations. Having completed a postgraduate certificate in psychological research methods, I am now working towards accredited status for social return on investment analysis through Social Value International. I am therefore excited to pursue research opportunities that explore the impact of neurodivergence on social evolution and the methods through which we can accept and facilitate neurodivergent expression. Because ultimately, we each have a social imperative to effect meaningful change in our communities, to support, empower, and understand the differences that make us uniquely human. There are a number of people and organisations involved in these projects that deserve a wholehearted thank you. Caitlin Poynton, Sophie Deeks, Kate Cook, and Linda O'Hara at the Lincolnshire Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, who supported the Spectrum project for the Lincolnshire Autism Support Network. And Harriet James and Dr. Lucy Wainwright at Epic Consultants and the National Lottery Community Fund team, who supported the RAW project for the Leaders with Lived Experience Fund. And of course, these projects would not have been possible without our amazing participants and brilliant coaches, Belle, Emily, and Paula. If you'd like to know more about our organisation, please email using the contact details here. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll now hand over to the chair of the session, who will introduce the next panel presentation. Please save any questions until the end of the session in a live Q&A. Thank you.
A big thank you to Shantelle Svarc. As someone with a background in sport and exercise science research, I absolutely love this presentation, and just seeing such a positive impact that strength and conditioning training has on autistic women. So our next speaker is Sally Adams from the University of Birmingham.
Hello, my name's Sally Adams. I'm an Associate Professor in Psychology at the University of Birmingham, and today I'm going to be talking about our research on adapting drug and alcohol services for autistic adults. This is a collaborative piece of work with Professor Mark Brosnan from the University of Bath. In today's talk, I'm going to be talking about the co-occurrence of drug and alcohol related problems with autism, touch briefly on some of the barriers that there might be to accessing support and treatment services, and then I'm going to talk about some of the research we've recently conducted looking at autistic adults and how they would seek support for alcohol-related problems, and some other work looking at how therapists provide support to autistic clients. Finally, I'm going to talk about our recent stakeholder engagement project, which is aimed at working with the autistic and autism communities to improve access to drug and alcohol services and effective provision of care. Evidence that's looked at the co-occurrence of autism with alcohol and substance use disorders has actually been quite limited and also highly variable, with co-occurrence estimated to be between 1 and 36%. But what seems to be known in the literature is once the alcohol or drug use is initiated in autistic adults, progression to a diagnosable alcohol or substance use disorder is accelerated in this population. In terms of accessing drug and alcohol services, we know that autistic young people are overrepresented in mental health and child welfare services. This isn't the case in drug and alcohol services. And this is potentially because autistic adults with alcohol-related problems may face multiple barriers to accessing and receiving treatment for alcohol misuse. In particular, it's that services may not be commissioned or provided in a way that meets the needs of autistic adults. In a sense, they are not autism friendly. With this in mind, our research aimed to assess and identify autism-aware alcohol and drug service provision by surveying firstly 507 members of the autistic community, asking specifically about alcohol in this case, how they would seek support if they felt that they had a problem with their drinking, but also how they feel that there might be barriers to seeking support. Secondly, we also asked 144 current alcohol and drug service providers about their training and experience with autistic clients, how they may make approaches and adaptations when working with autistic clients, and finally, their confidence about working with autistic clients. In terms of responses on seeking support from autistic adults about alcohol, 49% said that if they needed to, they would search for information online if they felt they needed support for their drinking. However, surprisingly and more concerning, 45% would not seek any support at all. This might be further understood by exploring barriers to seeking support. So when asked, autistic adults felt that these would be significant barriers to accessing support for an alcohol-related problem. 59% that it would be going somewhere unfamiliar. 57% said that they would be worried about being misunderstood. 56% said that they would fear being in a crowded or chaotic place. And 46% said fear of being judged for their drinking. In terms of what service providers say, 53% or just over half said that they'd received no specific knowledge or skills training in autism. Perhaps more concerning, when asked to rate the treatment response or outcomes of autistic clients, 49% of respondents said that these would be less favourable in comparison to other clients. In terms of providing approaches and adaptations to working with autistic clients, these were some of the responses. 65% that they said that would use plain language more than they would with other clients. 55% said that they would use a more structured and concrete approach. Just over half said that they would employ shorter sessions. 51% that they would avoid metaphors in therapy. And a further 50% said that they would discuss individual hobbies and interests as part of the therapy. In terms of their confidence in working with autistic clients, therapists said that they were most confident that they could be empathetic towards an autistic client, but that they were less confident that they could identify therapeutic approaches that would be effective for an autistic client. When looking at associations with therapists' confidence, it was found that confidence was related to having received autism training, the number of adaptations that were used by the therapist, but also how they perceived the success of the outcome for autistic clients. Building on this work, we have recently received funding from Autistica and Alcohol Change UK in order to take an engagement project, and this is to build a network of autistic adults who have lived experience of drug and alcohol problems, their family supporters, carers and advocates, but also social workers and service providers. And the aim of this project is to speak with these different individuals to understand what might be barriers and facilitators and the kind of adaptations that we can put in place to improve access to services, but also provision of effective service and support. We are still looking for people to take part in this project. If you think you would be interested or have something to contribute, we'd love to hear from you. You can email me on s.adams.2@beham.ac.uk. We're looking to speak to people about their experiences, but also to work together to identify barriers and facilitators in terms of accessing support for drug and alcohol related problems. In conclusion, it appears that conventional approaches to supporting and treating drug and alcohol related problems are not entirely appropriate for autistic adults. But the good news is that actually there are changes that we can make and adaptations. We can be better informed about adapting services for autistic adults, but also we can provide practical and theoretical training for therapists. And I think it's also really important that we develop a shared perspective of what the desired aims and outcomes of the therapeutic process and of drug and alcohol services are. But in order to do this, further research is required to look at what are effective adaptations. How can we change the environment, communication and support provided in drug and alcohol services to better meet the needs of autistic adults? And with our current engagement programme, we want to do this with lived experience at the heart of service improvements. So please do get in touch if you feel that you would like to contribute to this project. I would just like to take some time to acknowledge the members of the autistic community that took part in our research, but also have been part of our engagement work. Similarly, the service providers and therapists who took part in our research, and my collaborators, Professor Mark Brosnan, Dr. Tom Freeman, and our collaborators outside of academia, Andrew Mizzle in Alcohol Change UK and Martin Blakeborough from the Kaleidoscope Project. Finally, I would like to thank Autistica and Alcohol Change UK for the funding that's been possible to make this work happen. I am now going to hand over back to the chair of this session and will be available at the end of the session to answer any questions you may have about our work. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sally. And for anyone who's interested in learning more about this vital research, there is information about this on the Autistica website, an important piece of research to ensure that users of drug and alcohol issues have better support. So we're just moving now to our Q&A session. So an opportunity here for presenters to be able to respond to the questions that have come in. And a big thank you to everyone who has actually sent in a question. So I have the first question here, which is for Mary. And this comes in from Sam, who's an autistic adult, who's 53 years old, and looking to begin her PhD in the coming year. Sam has written that she notes you mentioned there is little to no prior research focused on older adults. And she asks, do you have any recommendations for research that she could explore further?
Thanks very much, Sam, for your question. Well, I guess really the world is your oyster. There's so little research done in older adults. There's gaps in terms of menopause for older women. Many women have not been identified as being autistic until later in life. So there could be work on late diagnosis compared to early diagnosis. There could be work on accessing medical care, accessing social care, training for social care workers. There could be work done with older adults and cognitive changes and any aspect of healthy aging. So I've suggested in the chat that you could reach out to me and we could have a discussion to see what your interests are and which way you might want to go. So thanks very much for that question.
Sam, that's a great offer there from Mary, and I hope that helps answer your question and also connects you both too. So our next question is for Georgia. So Georgia, homelessness is a huge issue with many stretched services. Are services showing a willingness to take time to adapt and learn to better support autistic people?
Hi, thanks for that question. It's a really good question, and absolutely, homelessness services are extremely stressed, and especially over the last couple of years over the pandemic. But I have to say, all the homelessness services that I've been working with, mainly in London, but a few, so I've been in touch with quite a few outside London as well, have been really actually reaching out to me about this area and realizing this is an area that needs to have more work done. They realise the need for autism training of their staff, and actually a lot of this work actually happens sort of the other way around, homelessness services coming to researchers. So I'm happy to say that it's kind of from the ground up, this research that's happened.
That's very exciting to hear that there's proactive work going on within the homelessness provision community to actually take better care of the needs of autistic people. So we have a question here for Shantelle. Shantelle, this one's from me, taking a presenter's opportunity here. So it's absolutely wonderful to hear how you have been delivering this programme. You mentioned that people don't need to have a formal diagnosis. I just wondered how women actually find out about the programme and then choose to go on to it.
We work quite closely with social prescribers. So we get a lot of referrals from them, which has been absolutely incredible. It's a really fantastic network out here in Lincolnshire. So we can get those links into the community through social prescribers and through peer support workers. We also do a lot on social media, actually. We utilise Facebook quite a lot because I think if you're a woman who isn't diagnosed, you may well not be accessing services for autistic people, and therefore you're not going to hear about some of the really positive things that are happening in the community. So we do a lot of work on Facebook to try and get the word out there, really, and encourage people to kind of find that place where they fit. I think a lot of undiagnosed autistic women are just kind of they don't have that identity for themselves. It's a really I know before I had my diagnosis, I was late diagnosed at 31. It's like you're trying to figure out why you are the way you are and why other people just don't get it. And I think it's so important to be able to encourage non-diagnosed autistic women to access those spaces and find that place where they're safe and they're accepted. And they can actually express themselves as they are, as opposed to just spending their life masking.
Thank you. And there was a second question just about how the pandemic impacted your work, because you mentioned that in your presentation.
From a funding perspective, I think in some ways it actually kickstarted us because there was so much money around. We were very new at the time. We didn't have a brilliant set of accounts to show funders. We didn't have an amazing track record yet or anything. And the fact that they were willing just to kind of almost throw money out there was quite handy for us as a very new organisation. But of course, then it came with challenges for lockdowns and stopping and starting and projects, really. So we did do a lot of work on Zoom over the lockdown. That had its own set of challenges and people not really liking to access it as much. So it was really nice to be able to get back in the gym and have that face-to-face contact with people again. So positives in some ways, negatives in others, as always. But fingers crossed, we can now start to move forward a little bit more and do a lot more in-person work.
Thank you, Shantelle. So Sally, the next question is for you. Do you feel that we need to have more therapists and consultants with lived experience of autism in drug and alcohol services?
Thank you for the question. And I think it would be an excellent, it would be great to have some representation of people with lived experiences working in drug and alcohol services. It's always good to see yourself represented in services that you're accessing. And of the work that we've been doing with the therapists so far, so in our engagement project, the majority obviously said that they didn't have any training in autism or autism-friendly provision. And what they have learned is from working with clients who are autistic. So they've really learned a lot by engaging with people with lived experiences of how to kind of work with other clients going forward. But I think if that representation was not only, you know, in training and not only in perhaps educational materials that are provided, actually having therapists who themselves have lived experience, I think would be fantastic, and perhaps the sort of gold standard of having an inclusive service and an autism-friendly drug and alcohol service support.
Thank you. The questions come in for Mary, which again is just focusing in on why has there been so little attention to older autistic people in research and in services?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that's been very problematic. So thanks very much for that question. The majority of research continues to be in children, and it's only recently that we have a journal that is dedicated to adulthood, so autism and adulthood, which is a just fantastic journal to see that's come about. It's really, I think, changing the picture, and we can see that the journals are changing. Part of the response to that will probably be because where the funding goes as well, and as we're moving more towards social models of disability rather than medical models, there's going to be less on how to change the autistic person and more on how to have a long, healthy life. And I would imagine that as we go forward, we will have more research on adults. And I mean, I'm sure other people have this as well. Quite often, you know, over the last 15 years, when I've said I've been working within the field of autism, there is that attitude, which is very wrong, of course, that autistic people are children, and that I'm working with children, but I've always worked across the lifespan. And I think as this becomes more prominent, then the research will grow. And that's one thing that's come out of our research, that the people that we worked with were very keen that we support them in raising the awareness that autism is across the lifespan and into aging. And of course, you know, the individuals that we were talking to and working with, when they were young, the supposed percentage of diagnosis of autism within the community was about 0.4%, and of course it's over 1% now. So you know, there's multitude of reasons, and part of that stigma, part of that's just, you know, where the funding is, and so forth.
Thank you, Mary. And we've had another question that's come in, which also is just about awareness and attention. And this one refers to Georgia's presentation, and it was around what can be done to raise awareness about homeless autistic women and their needs, and if social care and other services can better support homeless people that are autistic.
Thanks. Another really good question, and I guess quite linked to what Mary's been talking about as well, because I think a key thing that's come out of the work that we did, and I sort of touched on in the presentation but didn't really manage to go into much detail about, was the importance of training, autism training for staff. And we're hoping to push forward with this research. There's already, in fact, an autism and homelessness toolkit that can be used and is currently used in Westminster City Council and their homelessness services there. But we're really hoping to sort of basically update that toolkit. It was developed a couple of years ago, but doesn't really have much specific information about women in autism, and we're hoping to kind of update it, and also trying to create a sort of autism training package that might go along with it. That's sort of where our research wants to go. But I think also I should highlight that the research there's hardly any research at all about experiences, women's experiences of being homeless, women who are autistic experiences, and so there's a real need to really conduct this research, and mainly kind of maybe using sort of narrative studies and qualitative research methods in order to increase our understanding of experiences, that can then further inform these toolkits and training packages. So that's where hopefully our research will go, and that's what I think hopefully will make a difference in terms of awareness.
Thank you, Georgia, and it's just lovely to hear that this is such important research, and it will go wide, I'm sure, in terms of raising awareness, but also about educating as well. Thank you. So we had a question for Sally. Addiction issues aren't just drugs and alcohol. Should we be providing more support for diet-related issues, such as sugar addiction, which has terrible consequences, and behavioural insights that might be related?
Thank you for the question. I think I mentioned in my talk that actually service provision for addiction and drug and alcohol use are very small in the UK. I think it's one of the most underfunded areas. And at the moment, I believe that the NHS provision is very focused on drug addiction or substance use. And I think that's because research-wise, we're not kind of in a place where we are with drug and alcohol research. We have quite a lot of information about how these drugs work and what effective treatments could be. But we are much further behind with behavioural addiction. So this is things such as internet gaming or eating addiction. We are woefully behind on the research in these areas. They're not as investigated, and unfortunately that means that we don't really have any sort of efficacious or effective drug service provision that can be provided for these. So we are really behind the times with these, and medics and addiction workers continue to debate about whether they are true addictions. There is a lot of controversy around this, but there are people that obviously do present with difficulties around these, and hopefully going forward we will be able to look at whether we can provide tailored or not one-size-fits-all therapy and support for people with these types of behavioural addictions going forward. Very complicated area, needs much more research.
Thank you, Sally. And I think we will just have two more questions. So a question I have for Mary. You mentioned in your research, Mary, about hoping that it would impact social work training. So I just wanted to know if you had thought about what types of recommendations you hope to make.
Yes, so we've actually applied. So part of the Autistica grant was to submit an application to the NIHR, and part of our application was to take a strengths-based approach and to embed practice and embed the training within practice. So you know, I don't want to kind of steal our thunder, because we're going to hear next month whether we've got the grant or not. But as you know, everyone here I'm sure already knows, training tends to be much more an individualist approach, and you know, some of the comments were that people felt othered, and if somebody, some of the issues, of course, with older autistic adults is that they may not have a diagnosis because there's a long queue for diagnosis, or they may not be fully there yet with understanding that they could be autistic themselves, or there could be a number of issues with that. So it's really important to have a much more universal design where it's done automatically, so the burden is taken away from the autistic people having to constantly train everyone to be able to understand how to work with them. And so it should be an automatic thing. So it's just having good practice across the board. So how would you like to communicate? Where would you like to have the meeting? All of those things that we're probably fairly familiar with just needs to be completely embedded within practice. So that approach is done within practice. So those are the sorts of things that we're thinking about. I hope that answers your question.
It does, Mary. Thank you. So we have a question for Shantelle, and then we'll wrap up with one last one for Sally. So Shantelle, there were so many wonderful success stories that you shared in your presentation. How do you help people take that first step when they're feeling anxious or scared?
Yeah, it's a really big, it's really difficult for people to walk into a gym. I think for pretty much anyone, to be perfectly honest, a gym is generally a very scary place to be if you've not done that before. And so that anxiety surrounding what happens, who do I talk to, everything it becomes amplified, I think, when you're autistic. So the way we set up that initial contact, so I know for me personally, I wouldn't phone someone up to talk to them about it. It's not a thing I would ever consider doing. So that first step is always an email or a message. It's always typed out. They can ask anything they want. They get friendly responses and smileys and all sorts of cool stuff in text. And we try to make it as relaxed and as informal a process as possible. And we get some people message, and you never hear back from them for 2 or 3 months, and then they pop up again and they've processed it, they've sorted their mental state out, and they're ready, and that's absolutely fantastic. So we give them that space. They don't just have to turn up the next day or anything like that if they need that processing time. All of our groups are capped at 4, so they're not going to walk into a gym full of 20 people or shouting and screaming at each other with loud techno music in the background or anything. 4 people, 1 coach. It's a really quiet, gentle environment, and they just get talked to like a person, and their wants and needs are catered for. And it's not this kind of weird thing of as everyone else is saying, having to explain why you need something a certain way. We just do it. So it is a difficult first step, but once you get past that, I think the space is friendly and gentle enough that actually it becomes accessible at that point, is our hope, and our feedback from a lot of participants. And we always take their perspectives in mind. So we had best part of 9 months with the first project and a year with the second, and we're just constantly developing and adapting to make sure we are meeting their needs. It's not a set thing, it's something that is a living structure almost.
Thank you, Shantelle. I think most of us can relate to some of those feelings of getting intimidated there. Thank you. So last but certainly not least, a question for Sally. Is there any concern that therapists thought they could empathise with autistic clients when considering the double empathy problem?
Yeah, I think that's a really good and important question. And I think it does raise some of the concerns that we had conducting the research and before we got the funding for the engagement project, is that people often bring their own preconceived ideas or feel that they can empathise with people who view the world very differently to them, but actually we all view things very differently. So I think this is why with the engagement project that we are doing, it is essential to include people with lived experiences in deciding what adapting services needs to look like in terms of, what do we need to be asking? What do materials need to look like? What does the environment need to look like? As I mentioned in my talk, drug and alcohol services are pretty chaotic places. They can be very noisy. They can be very strange. So I think it is really important. And again, with with, you know, what does empathy mean, or what does empathy mean when engaging with someone who views the world differently to you, is really important. So I think having people with lived experience at the very heart of our research going forward is what we want to do in creating something that's supportive for autistic clients.
Thank you, Sally. Food for thought indeed. So I'd just like to give a big thank you to all our speakers today, and for you, our audience, for watching, and for all of your brilliant and very insightful and thought-provoking questions. We're adding our speakers' email addresses into the Q&A system right now. So if you'd like to ask further questions, please feel free to put them in there. And that's us for today. So we'll be talking about social relationships and mental health tomorrow. So really do hope you can tune in. We'll be starting at 10 a.m. sharp. So we look forward to welcoming many of you again. Have a great afternoon and a fabulous evening. Thanks very much.